I am Gabriel Thorne, and I am 30 years old. For the better part of a decade, I have served as a federal agent, tracking down organized criminals and dismantling fraud syndicates. At 2:27 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday morning, the most horrifying case of my entire career landed right in my lap, and it involved my own family. My 72-year-old father, a man who broke his back for 40 years working in an auto parts factory to give us a decent life, was calling me from a holding cell at the Marion County Police Station. He was completely terrified. Through violent sobs, he told me that my sister-in-law, Vanessa, had brutally beaten him with a heavy aluminum baseball bat. But instead of running away, she called the police and claimed he was the aggressor. She told the local cops that his mind was gone, that he was violently insane, and that he needed to be permanently locked away. And the most sickening part of it all? My older brother, Raymond, his own flesh and blood, just stood against the kitchen counter and watched her do it without saying a single word. They wanted to lock my father in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his natural life. They were setting the stage to declare him mentally incompetent so they could seize absolute control over his real estate, his bank accounts, his retirement funds, and his entire inheritance. But they made one massive, catastrophic mistake in their brilliant, cold-blooded plan. They completely forgot what I do for a living. They forgot that I have access to federal forensic resources, sweeping jurisdictional authority, and a terrifying lack of mercy when it comes to defending the people I love. Right now, Raymond and Vanessa are facing the absolute destruction of their lives. They are facing decades in a concrete cell, begging for a forgiveness they will never get. Before I tell you exactly how I tore their world apart piece by piece, hit that like button if you believe that justice and truth must always come to light. And please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to the exact moment this nightmare began. The piercing ring of my cell phone shattered the dead silence of my downtown apartment. When you are in federal law enforcement, a phone call at 2 in the morning never brings good news. It usually means a raid has gone terribly wrong, a fugitive has crossed state lines, or a fellow agent is dead. I threw off the heavy winter comforter, the freezing air of the room hitting my bare skin. I reached out in the dark, my hand fumbling over the wooden nightstand until my fingers gripped the cold metal of my phone. I squinted against the harsh, bright glare of the screen. The caller ID simply said, "Dad." My stomach instantly tied itself into a massive knot. My dad was a man of strict routine. He went to bed at 9 o'clock every single night, right after the evening news broadcast. For him to be calling me at this hour meant something had gone horribly, unimaginably wrong. "Dad," I answered, my voice thick with sleep but immediately laced with adrenaline. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Son, Gabe, help me." The sound that came through the receiver was a hollow, trembling rasp. It sounded like he was struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs, like a man drowning in his own panic. I sat up immediately. My bare feet hit the freezing hardwood floor, and the sudden chill grounded me, snapping my brain into complete operational focus. "Dad, take a deep breath and tell me exactly where you are," I said, projecting the steady, authoritative tone I used during crisis negotiations. "What is going on?" "I am at the police station, Marion County," he pleaded, the sheer terror in his voice making my blood run completely cold. I could hear the tinny, echoing background noise of a busy precinct. Radios were squawking with dispatch codes. Heavy metal doors were slamming shut, and people were shouting in the distance. "Vanessa is framing me. She told the police I attacked her with a baseball bat in the kitchen. She hit herself, Gabe. She took the bat, she smashed it against the granite counter, and she hit her own shoulder. She did it to herself." I gripped the phone so tightly I could hear the plastic casing groan under the pressure. I closed my eyes, trying to process the absolute insanity of his words. "Where is Raymond? Is Raymond there?" "He just stood there watching." My father wept, his voice breaking into a fragile sob that tore through my chest. He leaned against the wall. He did not say a word to stop her. "Gabe, they are telling the police I am crazy. They are telling them I have severe dementia and that I belong in a locked facility. My federal training instantly overrode the shock radiating through my body. I knew exactly what this was. This was not a tragic domestic dispute. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a highly calculated, vicious setup. Dad, listen to me very carefully, I commanded, enunciating every single syllable to make sure he understood the gravity of the situation. Keep absolutely silent. Do not speak to any officers. Do not answer any of their questions, even if they seem friendly. Do not sign any documents whatsoever. If they try to hand you a piece of paper, you refuse to take it. I am leaving my apartment right now. I am coming to get you. I did not bother changing into casual civilian clothes. I threw on my tactical trousers, laced up my heavy-duty combat boots, and grabbed my winter coat, my credentials, and my car keys. I tore out of my apartment building and threw myself into my vehicle. The drive through the empty, rain-slicked streets of Indianapolis was a blur of neon streetlights and blinding rage. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. The entire way, my mind raced through 1,000 terrifying legal scenarios. My brother's silence was not the panicked, confused reaction of a man caught in a sudden family argument. It was cold, calculated complicity. He was actively helping his wife destroy our father to get his hands on the inheritance early. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of the Marion County Police Precinct, I slammed the car into park, did not even bother locking the doors, and walked through the heavy glass double doors. The harsh fluorescent lights beat down on the scuffed linoleum floor of the lobby. I scanned the room immediately. There he was. My father sat huddled on a hard, unforgiving plastic chair in the far corner of the waiting area. He looked 20 years older than the last time I saw him. He was wearing a thin wool sweater, his shoulders hunched, staring blankly at the floor. He looked like a prisoner of war waiting for an execution squad. A few feet away, standing directly at the main front desk, was my sister-in-law, Vanessa. She was putting on the performance of an absolute lifetime. She held a crumpled tissue to her face, forcing loud, dramatic, heaving sobs that echoed off the cinder-block walls. She pointed repeatedly to a faint red mark on her right shoulder, pushing her way closer to the counter where Duty Officer Dennis Miller was lazily writing on a clipboard. "You do not understand, officer," Vanessa cried out, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a terrified, abused victim. He just snapped. He came out of his room and he just completely lost his mind. He is entirely out of control. You have to write up a psychiatric hold and send him to a secure facility tonight before he hurts someone else. He is dangerous. We have been trying to manage his decline, but we just cannot do it anymore. I bypassed the civilian waiting area completely and walked straight up to the main counter, placing my body directly between Vanessa's fake tears and the officer. I ignored her existence entirely. I did not look at her. I did not acknowledge her presence. "I need to speak with that man in a private room immediately," I told Officer Miller, keeping my voice dead level and devoid of any emotion. "I am also requesting the presence of the duty lawyer before any further statements are taken from him, and I want a physical copy of whatever report you are currently drafting." Miller looked up from his clipboard. He had the arrogant, tired, slightly bloated look of a local desk cop who hated being interrupted by civilians. He scoffed, leaning back in his squeaky desk chair, looking me up and down with obvious disdain. "Take a seat, buddy," Miller said dismissively, waving his pen at the waiting area. "Wait your turn like everybody else. The local police are handling a domestic dispute here. We do not need outside interference, and I am certainly not logging your requests until I finish this incident report for the victim." I reached inside my heavy jacket pocket. I pulled out my thick leather credential case and slammed it open flat on the counter with a loud crack. The gold federal agent shield caught the overhead light, heavy, imposing, and completely undeniable. "I am not making a suggestion, Miller," I stated firmly, watching the color rapidly drain from his face as his eyes locked onto my federal credentials. "I am instructing you to preserve the evidence and secure that scene at the house in accordance with federal law enforcement protocols. You will halt this interrogation right now. You will stop writing that report. and you will provide my father with a private room, or we are going to have a very serious conversation about federal obstruction of justice." The change in Miller was instantaneous. The sheer arrogance vanished, replaced by the panicked realization that he had just talked down to a federal agent who could end his career with one phone call. He sat up completely straight, cleared his throat loudly, and immediately closed the incident report file he had been drafting for Vanessa. He picked up his radio, his hand shaking slightly, to comply with my orders regarding the house. Vanessa stopped her fake crying. The tissue dropped from her face. She stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open, realizing that her neatly packaged narrative had just been blown to pieces. I turned my back to her and walked over to the corner where my father was sitting. I placed my hand gently on his back. I wrapped my other arm around him to help him stand up so we could move to the private room. As he pushed himself off the plastic chair, his legs suddenly gave out completely. He stumbled heavily to the left, his weight collapsing toward the floor. I quickly grabbed his forearm to catch him and stop him from hitting the hard tiles. The sudden, forceful jerk caused the thick cuff of his wool sweater to slide all the way up toward his elbow. My eyes locked onto his exposed skin. The breath caught entirely in my throat. Deep, dark, discolored bruises formed complete, horrific rings around both of his wrists. I thought the worst part of this night was the false arrest. I was incredibly, dangerously wrong. Seeing those distinct, horrifying marks on my father's wrists flipped a switch deep inside my brain. The local precinct was no longer a safe environment. It was heavily compromised. I immediately canceled my plans to take him to my apartment and diverted straight to the emergency room at the city hospital. During that tense, agonizingly quiet drive through the dark city, the ghosts of my family's past filled the heavy silence in the car, explaining exactly how we had arrived at this absolute nightmare. Raymond had always been the golden child of the Thorne family. It was a toxic dynamic established very early in our childhood. When we were teenagers, Raymond was given a brand new car for his birthday, while I worked exhausting night shifts at a local Walmart just to buy a rusted-out clunker to get to school. Our mother, who passed away 5 years ago, always made excuses for him. When Raymond blew through his massive college fund on frat parties, expensive vacations, and terrible business investments, my parents dipped deeply into their retirement savings to bail him out. When I joined the Federal Academy, I paid my own way. I never asked for a single dime. I never expected a handout. And yet, I was always viewed as the distant, ungrateful son who cared more about his salary and his promotion than his own blood. Our extended family, especially Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard, actively fed into this delusional dynamic. At every Thanksgiving dinner, they would praise Raymond's fictitious entrepreneurial ventures, while completely ignoring my grueling career in law enforcement. To them, Raymond was the charming, successful son who was going to take care of the family legacy. I was just the rigid, unapproachable cop who missed family gatherings because I was too busy working cases. Then Vanessa entered the picture 2 years ago. She was slick. She was incredibly manipulative, and she knew exactly how to play the role of the dutiful, loving daughter-in-law. After our mother's funeral, my father was incredibly vulnerable, lonely, and sitting on a fully paid-off house, a substantial 401k, and a massive inheritance from my grandfather. Vanessa and Raymond moved in with him under the guise of taking care of his affairs and keeping him company during his grief. At first, it was subtle. I would call on a Sunday afternoon, and Vanessa would answer, telling me Dad was taking a nap and could not come to the phone. Then the excuses escalated. Dad was confused today. Dad had a minor fall and needed total rest. They started a quiet, insidious gaslighting campaign, not just isolating him from me, but convincing the rest of the extended family that his mind was rapidly deteriorating. They stopped inviting me to Sunday dinners. When I tried to drop by unannounced, Raymond would meet me on the porch, physically blocking the front door, giving me a somber speech about how seeing me agitated our father's fragile mental state. I had been highly suspicious, but I never in my darkest nightmares imagined physical violence. I thought it was just standard family greed. As I drove through the empty streets toward the hospital, my phone vibrated loudly in the cup holder. It was Aunt Beatrice. I answered it on speakerphone, keeping my eyes glued to the road. "Gabriel, what on earth is happening?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill with judgment and accusation. "Raymond just called us in a total panic. He said your father had a violent episode. He attacked poor Vanessa. Raymond is terrified. We all knew his dementia was getting worse, but you never want to face reality. Do you? You always think you know better than everyone else." Raymond was already working the phones. He was preemptively controlling the narrative, ensuring the extended family would pressure me into accepting a medical explanation rather than a criminal one. He wanted me to back down. He wanted to use the family as a shield to hide his crimes. "Dementia does not cause what I am looking at right now, Beatrice," I said coldly, my grip tightening on the steering wheel until my hands cramped. "You are not a doctor, Gabriel. Stop trying to play the hero and let your brother handle this. It is a family matter, not a police matter. Do not you dare bring a lawsuit into this family. Raymond is trying to protect his wife from a crazy old man." I hit the button and hung up on her. There was absolutely no point in arguing with people who were desperately committed to a lie. We arrived at the hospital. The bright neon lights of the emergency room sign cut through the darkness. The intake nurse took one look at my father's pale, sweat-slicked face, his shallow breathing, and his trembling hands, and immediately rushed him past the waiting room. They placed him in a high-priority trauma bay. The sterile, sharp smell of antiseptic filled the room as Dr. Julian Hayes, the senior attending physician, walked in and began a full physical examination. I stood in the corner of the room, my arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching the medical monitors beep with an erratic, terrifying rhythm. The initial medical report was absolutely grim. My father was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and his heart rate was fluctuating dangerously. The rapid blood work showed a complete absence of his prescribed heart medication in his system. They had been deliberately depriving him of his daily life-saving medication for at least 3 days. Then, Dr. Hayes moved to my father's wrists. He gently pushed up the sleeves of the heavy wool sweater. He used a small, bright penlight to examine the skin integrity, tracing the dark, purple rings that dug deeply into the fragile, paper-thin skin of my father's arms. Dr. Hayes stood up, clicked off his penlight, and looked directly at me. His expression was completely devoid of standard bedside manner. It was the look of a seasoned professional staring directly at the evidence of a violent crime. "These bruises are not from a struggle that happened an hour ago in a kitchen," the doctor stated, his voice low, firm, and echoing slightly in the quiet trauma bay. "The hematoma patterns, the deep tissue discoloration, these indicate the injuries are 4 to 7 days old. These are classic restraint marks, Agent Thorne. They are entirely consistent with heavy-duty plastic zip ties." I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. My vision narrowed until all I could see was the bruised skin on my father's arms. My own brother and his wife had zip-tied a 72-year-old man to a bed. They had tortured him. I excused myself from the trauma bay and stepped out into the quiet, brightly lit hospital corridor. The fury building inside me was absolute, overwhelming, but I forced it down into a cold, highly functional, weaponized focus. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line for Officer Miller at the precinct. "Miller," he answered, sounding incredibly annoyed and put out. "The hospital just confirmed my father has been physically restrained with zip ties for nearly a week," I said, my voice cutting through the phone line like a razor blade. "He has been deprived of his heart medication. You ignored clear, undeniable evidence of long-term elder abuse at that station tonight to write a domestic report for the abuser." Miller started to stammer, trying to interrupt and defend his lazy police work. I cut him off completely. "Listen to me very carefully, officer. You are in direct violation of mandatory elder abuse reporting requirements. If you do not dispatch units to preserve the evidence at that house, and if you do not file an accurate, updated incident report immediately, I will escalate this to Internal Affairs, the District Attorney's Office, and the Federal Oversight Committee by sunrise. I will personally ensure your salary is revoked, your pension is burned, and your career is over. Do you understand your professional liability here? The line went completely dead for a long, agonizing moment. Miller clearly realized that his pathetic attempt to dismiss the case was now heavily documented and directly conflicted with hard, irrefutable medical reality. His tone shifted instantly from dismissive arrogance to defensive panic. "I will update the report, Agent Thorne," Miller muttered quickly. "I will dispatch Sergeant Dominic Ross to secure the premises and document the evidence exactly as you have requested." I hung up and returned to the trauma room. The drip was steady, pumping much-needed fluids into my father's veins. He looked slightly more alert, though his eyes were still filled with a profound, soul-crushing sorrow. He reached out and grabbed my hand with his trembling fingers. He pulled me closer until his head was inches from mine. "Do not take me back to that house, Gabe," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the hospital monitors. "They locked me in that room for days. They wanted me to sign papers I could not read. They said if I did not sign, I would not eat. I was so thirsty, Gabe." His words confirmed my absolute worst fears. The abuse was systematic. It was a slow, agonizing, highly calculated extortion. I squeezed his hand, promising him on my life that he would never step foot in that house again as a victim. But I had to go back. I knew the real truth, the paper trail, was waiting behind the locked doors of that house. And before Raymond and Vanessa could destroy the physical proof, I was going to secure it. The storm was just beginning, and I was bringing it straight to their front door. The sky over Indianapolis was the color of bruised iron as I pulled into the driveway of my father's house an hour later. The property stood dead silent. The front lawn was perfectly manicured, mandated by the strict HOA rules of the neighborhood, and the porch light was glowing a warm, welcoming yellow. It looked exactly like the idyllic suburban home it had always been. The house where we had celebrated every holiday, where our mother had baked pies, where my father had proudly painted the shutters every single spring. But I knew better now. It was a slaughterhouse disguised as a sanctuary. I used the spare key my father had secretly slipped into my hand at the hospital. The heavy wooden door clicked open, and I stepped into the hallway. The interior air was heavy, stagnant, filled with the stale, sour smell of a home that had been neglected for weeks. I bypassed the living room, ignoring the expensive furniture my parents had worked years to afford, and walked straight down the hall toward the primary bedroom. My tactical training told me to look for signs of a massive struggle: broken furniture, overturned lamps, or blood droplets on the carpet. But what I found was far more clinical, far more horrifying in its calculated cruelty. The door to my father's bedroom was not just shut. It was secured. I knelt down on the carpet to examine the hardware. A heavy-duty, commercial-grade deadbolt lock was installed on the outside of the door. The mounting screws were shiny and fresh, the brass finish completely unblemished. Someone had installed this within the last 2 weeks, specifically to keep someone inside from getting out. This was not a security measure to keep burglars away. It was a physical restraint. A prison cell built inside a residential hallway. "What the hell are you doing in this house?" I stood up slowly and turned around. Raymond stood at the end of the hallway, wearing a plush, expensive robe, holding a steaming cup of coffee. His face was tight with irritation, his posture aggressive and entitled. He clearly had no idea I possessed a key, nor did he expect me to leave our father at the hospital to conduct a physical search of the premises. "This is Dad's house," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "I have his key, and I have his direct authorization to be here. You have no legal standing to restrict my access to this property. You have no business poking around in the middle of the night," Raymond snapped, taking a heavy step closer to try and intimidate me. "Vanessa and I are taking care of Dad's affairs. You are overstepping your bounds, Gabe. Dad is sick. He is dangerous. He attacked my wife, and my lawyer is already drawing up the paperwork for an involuntary commitment." "I am securing the property as an active crime scene," I replied. I did not engage with his hostility. I did not yell. I simply stepped past him, maintaining my absolute composure. Stay out of my way, Raymond. I walked straight into the large kitchen. The granite countertops were cluttered with fast food wrappers, dirty plates, and empty prescription bottles, none of which belonged to my father's actual heart regimen. The house was a complete disaster zone. I went straight for the large stainless steel trash bin under the sink. It was overflowing. I pulled the heavy plastic liner out, tied the top, and set it on the linoleum floor. I grabbed a fresh trash bag, dumped the contents of the full one into it slowly, sifting through the debris with gloved hands, ignoring the grime, the smell of rotting food, and the wet coffee grounds. Near the very bottom, buried under greasy paper plates and empty wine bottles, I found exactly what I was looking for: a thick stack of shredded paper. I gathered the fragments, wiped off the grime, and spread them out on the clean section of the kitchen island. I spent the next 20 minutes meticulously piecing the strips together like a complex jigsaw puzzle while Raymond stood in the doorway, his face growing paler and more terrified by the second. It was a photocopy of my father's original will, the document he had held in a safety deposit box for 20 years, the document that promised to split his inheritance equally. The document had been deliberately sliced straight through the signature line and the asset distribution clauses. But that was not the smoking gun. Underneath the shredded will in the trash pile, I found a crumpled, heavily stapled document. I pulled it out and flattened it on the island. It was a general power of attorney form. I leaned in, scrutinizing the ink under the bright kitchen lights. The signature at the bottom was a jagged, shaky scrawl, an obvious, pathetic attempt to mimic my father's handwriting. But the real treasure was on the second page. I turned the sheet over to the notary section. The embossed seal was slightly smudged, but the notary's name and commission number were perfectly legible: Gwen Prescott. I pulled out my phone and accessed a public state database for commission notaries. It took less than 15 seconds to get a direct hit. The notary commission for Gwen Prescott had expired 3 years ago. I looked up at Raymond. He was gripping the wooden door frame, his knuckles entirely white. The smug, entitled confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by a terrified realization that his incredibly sloppy crimes were unraveling in real time. This was never a family dispute. It was never a tragic misunderstanding about an old man's declining mental health. Raymond and Vanessa had not just been taking care of his affairs. They had systematically dismantled his legal protections, physically imprisoned him, starved him of his medication, and forged legal documents to gain total, unchecked control over his estate. My father was not a patient they were lovingly nursing. He was a financial target they were in the active process of liquidating. I gathered the shredded will and the forged power of attorney, placing them carefully into a clear evidence bag I carried in my jacket. I did not say a single word to my brother as I walked past him and out the front door into the freezing night air. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The physical evidence was secured. Now I needed the digital blood trail. I thought the depth of their betrayal was fully exposed. I had absolutely no idea just how far down the rabbit hole of greed and manipulation this actually went. The next morning, the bright fluorescent lights of the federal field office buzzed quietly overhead. I had not slept a single minute. I was fueled entirely by pure adrenaline and a cold, burning need for absolute justice. I walked into the secure data forensic lab and placed the evidence bag containing the forged power of attorney directly on the desk in front of Maya Lin, our lead digital forensic specialist. Maya adjusted her glasses, scanned the forged document without saying a single word, and began typing rapidly on her mechanical keyboard. She was brilliant, relentless, and she knew my father personally. She had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at his house a few years back. She accessed the state's secure public records database to run a deep, exhaustive verification on the notary details. The notary listed here, Gwen Prescott, is completely invalid, Maya said, pointing to a flashing red flag on her monitor. Her license expired 3 years ago. Furthermore, she has 2 pending civil complaints against her for fraudulent stamping. This seal is entirely fabricated, Gabe. I nodded. I was already anticipating this exact outcome. The absolute lack of legitimacy in that document was the legal leverage we needed to pry open the bank vaults and expose the real motive. Draft the paperwork for a federal subpoena, I instructed her, my voice remarkably steady despite the rage burning inside me. I need the full, unredacted account history for my father's primary savings, his checking, and his retirement accounts. Go back 6 months. I want to see every single penny that moved. Maya executed the process with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. Because we were citing suspected felony elder financial exploitation and forgery, the Banking Compliance Division expedited the request. Within 2 hours, the bank provided the requested records in a highly secured, encrypted digital file. We sat side by side, scanning the line-item transactions on the large monitor. For a few months, it was completely normal. Grocery store trips, utility bills, pharmacy copays. And then, exactly 14 days ago, the movement of funds became violently, aggressively erratic. Look here, Gabe, Maya said, her voice dropping an octave as she highlighted a massive cluster of outgoing wire transfers. A lump sum of $250,000 had been withdrawn in a single wire transfer. The money did not go to a personal account in Raymond's name, which would have been far too obvious and easily traceable. It moved through a newly registered shell LLC under a generic corporate name. From there, the massive amount of money was fractured into dozens of smaller increments, purposely kept under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering IRS flags, and funneled directly into 3 offshore online gambling platforms. They routed it through an intermediary account, Maya explained, pulling up a complex flowchart on her secondary monitor. The LLC is registered directly to Vanessa. They were not just spending your dad's money on luxury goods or paying off their own credit card debt. They were laundering his entire life savings through shell entities to feed a massive, uncontrollable gambling addiction. I stared at the screen, the numbers burning painfully into my retinas. My father had worked 50 years on a factory floor, destroying his back and his knees to build that safety net for his retirement. Raymond and Vanessa had vaporized $250,000 in 2 weeks playing digital blackjack. Run a full, comprehensive background check on Vanessa, I said, the anger solidifying into cold ice in my veins. Check civil court records, DMV records, out-of-state warrants, and divorce decrees. I have a gut feeling this is not the first time she has run this specific playbook. Maya expanded the search parameters to a national federal database, cross-referencing Vanessa's social security number and her maiden name. The results populated on the screen in seconds, and they were absolutely staggering. Vanessa had utilized 3 different aliases in 3 different states, Arizona, Nevada, and Florida, over the last decade. Each file contained an incredibly thick record of civil litigation involving property disputes, fake domestic violence claims to win custody or housing, and completely drained bank accounts. In every single case, the victim was an elderly, highly vulnerable individual she had either married or moved in with as a caretaker. She is a professional predator, Gabe, Maya noted, scrolling through a devastating deposition from a divorce case in Phoenix. She targets them, gains access to their assets, triggers a violent conflict to get them legally removed from the home, and disappears the moment the accounts hit zero. Raymond had not just married a greedy woman. He had invited a financial serial killer into our father's home and actively, willingly helped her hold the knife to his throat. There is one more piece, I said, my eyes scanning the mess of paperwork on the desk. Check the multiple listing service, the MLS database used for all legitimate real estate transactions. Search for my father's property address in Indianapolis. Maya typed in the address. The search engine buffered for an agonizing second before returning a single, highly active listing. My stomach dropped completely. The house was currently listed on the market as a for sale by owner property. The asking price was $50,000 below market value to ensure a rapid, unquestioned cash sale. The listing date was less than 48 hours old. They had posted it the exact same day they locked the heavy deadbolt on his bedroom door. We clicked on the contract documents attached to the real estate listing. The document was a digital copy of an authorization form, again signed with that exact same shaky, pathetic forged version of my father's signature. They were not just draining his cash. They were actively executing a plan to liquidate his primary real estate asset while he was still technically alive and legally the owner. The evidence was absolute. It was documented with surgical precision. This was a planned, multi-stage financial execution, and I had the entire blueprint resting right in my hands. It was time to involve the district attorney. It was time to bring the hammer down and destroy their lives. I printed the files, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the proof. The storm was fully formed, and Raymond and Vanessa were standing right in the path of the tornado. I left the highly secure federal data forensic lab with a thick, heavy manila folder tucked firmly under my right arm. That single folder contained every single piece of documentary evidence needed to completely dismantle my brother's entire life and end his terrifying reign of control over my father. I had the forged general power of attorney with the blatantly expired notary seal. I had the extensive, multi-page bank transfer records showing exactly how $250,000 was illegally funneled from my father's hard-earned 401k into offshore gambling accounts. I had the fraudulent real estate listing proving they were trying to sell his house out from under him. And I had the undeniable, heartbreaking medical reports detailing the severe dehydration, the intentional medication deprivation, and the physical abuse my father had endured for nearly a week while locked inside his own bedroom. I did not go home to take a shower. I did not stop at a drive-thru for coffee or breakfast. I was running purely on adrenaline, federal training, and a deep, burning desire for absolute justice. I drove straight through the morning rush-hour traffic, navigating the busy streets of downtown Indianapolis, until I reached the Marion County Courthouse. I bypassed the standard civilian security lines, flashed my federal badge to the armed deputies at the entrance, and walked directly up to the executive suite of District Attorney Evelyn Monroe. Evelyn was a seasoned, completely ruthless prosecutor. She was a woman who had built her entire prestigious career putting away corrupt local politicians, high-level white-collar criminals, and vicious domestic abusers who thought they were above the law. She did not tolerate fools. She absolutely did not play political games, and she certainly did not waste her valuable time on weak, circumstantial cases. She was feared and respected in equal measure across the entire state. I walked into her office, completely bypassed her startled executive assistant, and placed the heavy evidence file directly on the center of her polished mahogany desk. I stood there in complete silence as she opened the folder. I did not need to offer a pitch or a lengthy explanation. The paperwork spoke for itself. I watched her sharp eyes track back and forth across the pages. I watched her meticulously compare the forged notary signature on the power of attorney to the official state database printout we had pulled from the archives. I watched her trace the incredibly complex, deliberately confusing flow of the stolen money from my father's retirement account, through the intermediary shell corporation registered directly to Vanessa, and finally into the untraceable offshore gambling sites. She spent 20 unbroken minutes reading through the entire file. She did not utter a single syllable. She did not sigh. She just absorbed the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. The silence in the room was heavy, electric, and filled with a dangerous anticipation. Finally, Evelyn closed the folder, tapped her pen against the desk, leaned back in her high leather chair, and looked up at me. Her expression was completely devoid of any warmth or standard professional sympathy. It was the terrifying, focused look of a legal predator locking onto its prey. The financial fraud here is documented with absolute surgical precision. Agent Thorne, Evelyn stated, her voice sharp and ringing with undeniable authority. Your brother and his wife have executed a textbook, highly calculated case of felony elder financial exploitation, aggravated assault, and gross forgery. They were actively trying to steal his entire inheritance and liquidate his primary real estate asset while he was still breathing. I am walking this down to the duty judge myself right now. We are getting a no-knock, comprehensive search and seizure warrant for your brother's commercial real estate office, his personal vehicles, and his private residence. We are going to freeze every single asset they possess, every bank account they touch, and every credit line they hold before they can hide another dime. Within 2 hours, the ink from the signature of the sitting Superior Court judge was dried on the warrant. The legal machine was now fully weaponized and aimed directly at Raymond and Vanessa. I gathered a specialized state police financial crimes task force. I absolutely did not want the local municipal precinct involved in this raid, especially not anyone connected to Officer Dennis Miller or his potentially corrupt shift supervisors who had tried to sweep this under the rug the night before. We needed a clean, undeniable, heavily coordinated strike. We coordinated the tactical logistics in the courthouse parking lot, strapped on our heavy protective Kevlar vests, and moved out in a fast, organized convoy of unmarked black SUVs toward Raymond's high-end commercial real estate office in the downtown financial district. Raymond ran a boutique property management firm in a sleek, modern, glass-fronted building. It was an office built entirely on the grand illusion of massive success. It was funded initially by the massive college fund our parents had foolishly drained for him years ago, and sustained by whatever money he could illegally siphon from unsuspecting clients and vulnerable family members. He loved to project the image of a wealthy, self-made entrepreneur, constantly bragging about his hefty salary, his expensive cars, and his country club memberships at every Thanksgiving dinner. But the ugly truth was he was nothing but a well-dressed parasite. We arrived at the front entrance of his building right at the peak of the busy lunch rush, ensuring maximum visibility and maximum humiliation. I held the federal warrant high in my left hand as I pushed violently through the heavy revolving glass doors of the lobby. The state task force officers fanned out immediately across the marble floor, securing the perimeter, locking down the elevators, and ensuring absolutely no physical files could be shredded and no hard drives could be wiped or destroyed. We bypassed the panicked receptionist, who literally dropped her expensive smartphone in pure shock, and walked straight down the main carpeted corridor toward the executive suites. I did not bother knocking. I kicked open the heavy frosted glass door to Raymond's private corner office. Raymond was seated comfortably behind a massive solid oak desk. He was wearing a tailored, three-piece designer suit, his large dual computer monitors completely filled with digital property transfer forms. He was literally in the middle of executing a document to finalize the unauthorized, deeply discounted cash sale of my father's house. His fingers were hovering right over the keyboard, ready to hit submit and steal the last remaining piece of our family's legacy. When he looked up and saw the gold police badge pinned to my tactical vest, and the 4 heavily armed state officers quickly surrounding his desk, his arrogant face drained of all color. He looked exactly like a ghost staring down the barrel of a gun. He completely froze, his hands trembling violently above his expensive mechanical keyboard. "Clear the floor," I ordered the lead task force sergeant, my voice booming through the quiet, luxurious office space, making sure every single employee in the bullpen outside could hear me. "Secure every single computer terminal, every laptop, every cell phone, and every physical file box in this entire building. Nobody touches a keyboard. Nobody makes a phone call." "Gabe, what on earth is this?" Raymond stammered, his voice cracking violently in absolute panic. He tried to stand up, attempting to project some kind of authority, but a massive state trooper stepped forward and placed a heavy, unforgiving hand on his shoulder, forcing him right back down into his plush leather chair. "You cannot just barge in here like some rogue cowboy. I have important clients in the waiting room. I run a legitimate business. I am calling my lawyer right now, and I am going to have your badge for this. Call whoever you want, Raymond. Call the mayor if it makes you feel better," I replied coldly, tossing the freshly signed, highly detailed search warrant directly onto his keyboard. "You are going to need a very expensive, very aggressive defense attorney. We are seizing this entire operation under suspicion of felony wire fraud, mass forgery, and severe elder exploitation. Your business is done. Your reputation is dead." Just as the officers began ripping the computer cables out of the walls and tagging the hardware for evidence collection, the door to the adjoining private conference room swung open. Vanessa stepped out. She was wearing a high-end designer dress, her hair perfectly blown out, her makeup flawless. She looked absolutely nothing like the hysterical, crying, deeply traumatized victim I had seen performing at the police station a few short hours earlier. She looked at the police officers tearing the office apart, She looked at the cardboard boxes being rapidly filled with client files, and finally, she looked directly at me. To my absolute disgust, she did not look scared. She did not look panicked. She actually crossed her arms over her chest, shifted her weight casually to one side, and a thin, incredibly arrogant, highly condescending smirk appeared on her face. She clearly thought she was the smartest person in the room. She believed she had completely scrubbed the physical scene of the assault at the house. She genuinely thought she had outsmarted a seasoned federal agent, a district attorney, and the entire local police force. "You are completely wasting your time, Gabriel," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with venomous confidence and unearned superiority. She walked closer, her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood floor, leaning against the edge of Raymond's desk. "You are just throwing a massive, embarrassing temper tantrum because your daddy is finally getting put in a secure psychiatric home where he truly belongs. You are upset that you lost control. But you will not find a single shred of proof that I laid a finger on that crazy old man. The home security cameras at the house have been broken for an entire week. We had a sudden power surge that fried the hard drives. It is a real tragedy, but you have absolutely nothing on me. So go ahead and take the computers. You will find nothing but legitimate real estate contracts." I did not break my stride. I did not raise my voice. I did not give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I simply signaled to the lead digital forensic technician to collect the personal mobile devices and the main network router blinking in the corner of the office. "I am not looking for your local hard drives, Vanessa," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and entirely devoid of any mercy or familial hesitation. "I am looking for the network activity logs. I am looking for the digital footprint you were entirely too stupid and too arrogant to cover." The arrogant smirk on her face vanished instantly. Her posture collapsed. Her arms dropped limply to her sides. She realized, entirely too late, that data packets traveling through a home router are actively backed up to remote cloud servers completely independent of the physical camera hardware itself. Destroying a DVR box in a utility closet does absolutely nothing to erase the data that has already been beamed to a secure server farm hundreds of miles away. The digital footprint of their intrusion, the exact timestamps of the video uploads, the specific IP addresses, and the metadata of their unauthorized access was already being pulled by my forensic team. The raid was systematic, highly aggressive, and completely flawless. Officers tagged computers, laptops, and mobile devices, dropping them directly into shielded Faraday evidence bags to prevent any remote wiping protocols or signal tampering. I pulled out a secondary tablet and monitored the MLS real estate portal in real time. As the state police took total physical control of the office network and severed the internet connection, the active listing for my father's property blinked, froze, and then permanently disappeared from the site. The unauthorized transaction was completely blocked by the district attorney's emergency freeze order. The sale was dead. Raymond slumped forward in his chair, putting his head in his hands, watching in absolute, paralyzing horror as his empire of fraud was dismantled piece by piece in front of his entire staff. He knew that, with these devices in our possession, every single financial movement, every threatening email, and every falsified signature was now under strict government control. The physical seizure of the equipment effectively ended their operation, leaving them with absolutely no means to destroy the trail of evidence that now pointed directly toward their criminal prosecution. But the financial fraud was only half the battle. I still needed to prove the physical assault. I needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that my father was completely innocent and that Vanessa was a violent predator. The seized electronic devices arrived at the secure forensic lab inside the shielded transport bags exactly an hour later. The atmosphere in the windowless, highly climate-controlled room was electric and intensely focused. Maya Lin, our lead digital forensic specialist, took immediate charge of the evidence. She unsealed the heavy bags, cataloging every single device before setting up the hardware on her massive, multi-monitor workstation. The low, constant hum of the massive server racks filled the cold room as she began the highly complex, incredibly tedious process of extracting the network activity logs from the main router we had recovered from Raymond's office. Maya was specifically looking for data transfer patterns. She was hunting for automated handshake requests that occurred within the home network during the exact week of the incident. She tracked the data stream meticulously, utilizing advanced packet-sniffing software to filter out the useless background noise of smart TVs, kitchen appliances, and cell phones. She was tracing a massive packet upload to a single, highly active endpoint that should not have existed if the security system was truly offline. Her fingers moved rapidly across the mechanical keyboard, running scripts and isolating the specific IP address. Suddenly, she stopped typing. She leaned incredibly close to the screen, her eyes widening in genuine disbelief, and then she turned her chair slowly toward me. "Gabe, you need to look at this right now," Maya noted, tapping the thick glass of the monitor with her pen. The home network has an active, continuous data link to a third-party peripheral device. It is pushing massive amounts of encrypted data. It is a Nest security unit. I frowned, leaning over her shoulder to inspect the complex data logs scrolling down the screen. Vanessa specifically told the responding officers that the main security system was fried by a power surge. She physically destroyed the central DVR box in the utility closet with a hammer. We verified that broken hardware at the scene last night. There should not be any active cameras transmitting from that house. The entire system was physically severed. "She did destroy the main system," Maya replied, a slow, incredibly triumphant smile spreading across her face. "But this IP address is not part of the main hardwired system. This is a standalone, wireless Nest unit. It operates completely independently. It is registered under a generic factory default name on the network, which is why they probably missed it during their sweep. I am pulling the device specifications and the hardware blueprint right now to see exactly what we are dealing with." Maya brought up the product catalog cross-reference on her secondary screen. The unit was not a standard, obvious wall-mounted camera. It was a highly covert nanny cam, specifically disguised as a decorative digital picture frame. "My father bought that," I realized, the memory hitting me like a speeding freight train. "He bought it over a year ago to display digital photos of my mother right after her funeral. He put it on the living room bookshelf that faces directly into the open kitchen. He never even knew it had a hidden camera function. He is not good with technology. He just thought it was a fancy digital photo frame that cycled through family pictures." The oversight by Raymond and Vanessa was massive. It was a fatal, incredibly arrogant error born of pure hubris. They had focused all their malicious energy on deleting the local CCTV footage and physically destroying the large hard drives in the closet. But they had completely ignored the unassuming picture frame sitting quietly on the shelf, displaying photos of the woman whose legacy they were currently trying to steal. Because it was left on a factory default setup, the hidden camera had been quietly pushing highly encrypted video packets directly to the cloud manufacturer's servers whenever it detected motion, regardless of the local network status or the destruction of the main DVR. "It is set to auto-backup," Maya continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard to issue a rapid federal subpoena directly to the cloud hosting company's legal compliance department. They clearly had absolutely no idea the unit was operational, or that it was constantly streaming to an off-site cloud account. The system just finished the handshake protocol to download a massive, high-definition video file. The timestamp metadata shows it was uploaded to the server during the exact hour of the incident this morning. She clicked the mouse, and a large progress bar appeared in the dead center of the main monitor. The tension in the room was completely suffocating. We were seconds away from seeing exactly what happened in that house, free from lies, free from manipulation, and free from Vanessa's theatrical performances. "The system just pulled the large video file," Maya said, her voice dropping to a harsh, anticipating whisper. "It is decrypted and ready to play." My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs, but my extensive tactical training kept my exterior completely steady. I stepped closer to the glowing monitor, planting my hands firmly on the cold edge of the metal desk. "Open the video file and zoom in on the kitchen frame," I ordered, my voice low, dangerous, and entirely focused on the mission. "I need to see every single movement in that kitchen from the moment my father walked into the room. Do not miss a second." The video rendered instantly. The frame showed the open-concept living room and kitchen with absolute, terrifying clarity. The night vision function of the camera illuminated the room in sharp, monochrome detail. The digital timestamp in the bottom right corner read, exactly 2:18 a.m. My father was sitting at the large granite kitchen island on a wooden stool. He was wearing his thin flannel pajamas, his head buried deep in his hands. He looked utterly defeated, completely exhausted, and broken by days of intentional starvation and physical restraint. He looked like a man who had completely given up on life. Then, Vanessa walked into the frame. She was carrying a heavy aluminum baseball bat, gripping it tightly in her right hand. She walked slowly toward my father, her face twisted in a look of rehearsed, highly theatrical aggression. She did not strike him immediately. She wanted to terrorize him first. She leaned in incredibly close to his face, whispered something vile that the microphone could not quite pick up, and then took a wide, deliberate step backward to give herself room to swing. The camera caught exactly what happened next in undeniable, irrefutable high definition. Vanessa swung the bat backward with both hands. But she did not swing it at my father. She swung it downward with all her might, smashing the aluminum barrel violently against the hard edge of the granite countertop. The loud, sharp metallic crack echoed loudly through the computer speakers, a sound designed to mimic a violent struggle. Then, she turned her body, pulled the bat back again, and deliberately struck her own right shoulder with enough extreme force to cause significant bruising and tissue damage. She immediately dropped the weapon to the floor, threw herself down onto the expensive hardwood tiles, and began to scream at the top of her lungs, feigning a brutal, unprovoked attack. She was rolling on the floor, crying for help, perfectly executing the plan to frame an innocent old man. The camera angle shifted slightly as movement occurred in the background. Raymond stepped into the frame from the dark hallway. He was fully dressed in casual clothes. He walked into the kitchen, leaned casually against the wooden doorframe, crossed his arms over his chest, and simply watched his wife fake her injury. He did not look shocked. He did not rush to help her. He had a slight, sickening, deeply satisfied smile on his face. He watched her roll on the floor while my father sat on the stool, completely confused, raising his frail hands in sheer terror as the malicious trap snapped firmly shut around him. I watched the screen, my grip tightening on the edge of the metal desk until my knuckles popped loudly in the quiet room. The betrayal was absolute. It was pure, unadulterated evil manifesting in my own family, playing out right before my eyes. She stepped back, and she struck her own shoulder with the bat to create a completely false injury. I said, my voice echoing coldly in the silent forensic lab. I pointed a shaking finger at the image of my brother leaning against the wall, his face illuminated by the kitchen light. Raymond, you actually stood there and watched her do this to Dad. You planned it together so you could claim custody, throw him in a ward, and drain his retirement accounts. You sold your own father for casino money. The video provided the irrefutable, undeniable proof we needed. It perfectly linked the forged real estate documents, the massive offshore bank transfers, and the physical setup into one cohesive, ironclad case of criminal conspiracy. The cloud footage was the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. It provided the exact, indisputable evidence required to secure federal and state indictments for felony elder abuse, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit major financial fraud. The investigation was officially closed. The hunt was over. It was time for the absolute slaughter of their freedom and the destruction of their arrogant lives. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. With that incredibly damning video saved on a highly secure, triple-backed-up federal server, Raymond and Vanessa thought they had played a brilliant game of chess. But they had absolutely no idea I had just flipped the entire board over, set it on fire, and locked the doors. The legal fallout from the discovery of that video was immediate, incredibly brutal, and entirely merciless. Armed with the high-definition cloud footage and the undeniable forensic financial reports showing exactly where every single stolen penny went, District Attorney Evelyn Monroe did not even entertain the ridiculous idea of offering a plea deal. When Raymond's defense attorney called to discuss a potential settlement, Evelyn simply hung up the phone. She went straight for the jugular. We executed the final arrest warrants before the sun even set that evening. I personally walked into the cold holding cell where they had temporarily placed Raymond after the office raid. He was sitting on a metal bench, staring at the floor, still trying to cling to the illusion that he could talk his way out of this. When I walked in, I did not say a word. I simply held up my federal tablet and played the high-definition video of him smiling while his wife beat herself with a bat. His reaction was immediate and pathetic. His legs literally gave out from underneath him. He collapsed off the bench and onto the hard concrete floor, sobbing hysterically like a child. He crawled toward my boots, begging me to remember that we were brothers. He begged me to think of our mother, crying and claiming she would never want to see her eldest son locked in a steel cage. He tried to blame it all on Vanessa, claiming she manipulated him, claiming he was just a victim of her schemes. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical disgust. The man on the floor was not my brother. He was a parasite. I told him he completely lost the right to call me his brother, and he lost the right to speak our mother's name the moment he put plastic zip ties on an old man and starved him for 3 days. I turned around and walked out, letting the heavy steel door slam shut behind me, completely deaf to his pathetic, echoing cries for mercy. The atmosphere in the Marion County Courthouse 6 months later was incredibly heavy, thick with the undeniable weight of the evidence presented. The trial had become a complete local media spectacle. The news stations were parked outside, covering the shocking story of a wealthy real estate agent torturing his own father. I sat in the front row of the crowded gallery, firmly holding my father's hand, watching as Raymond's highly paid, deeply stressed defense attorney attempted to weave a pathetic, convoluted narrative of family misunderstandings and a severe mental health crisis. It was a flimsy, entirely insulting strategy. The defense tried to paint my father as violent and confused, claiming Vanessa was just trying to protect herself. But the prosecution's case, anchored deeply by the high-definition video footage we had recovered from the cloud server, dismantled every single lie they had meticulously constructed. As the judge allowed the cloud-synced video to be played on the massive television screens positioned around the courtroom, the air left the room. The jury watched the exact moment Vanessa struck herself. They watched Raymond stand by, silently complicit, smiling at the horrific crime unfolding in his father's kitchen. The entire room went deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet. Several jurors openly gasped. The judge stared at the defendants with pure, unadulterated contempt. The defense attorney's arguments faltered, choked, and completely died. There was absolutely no room for debate, no room for reasonable doubt, when the brutal reality of their actions was captured so perfectly. The defense rested their case without calling a single witness, knowing it was completely hopeless. The jury did not even deliberate long enough to order lunch. They took less than 3 hours to return a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts for both defendants. The formal sentencing hearing followed a week later, and it was the single most satisfying moment of my entire professional career. Vanessa stood before the high wooden bench in a bright orange jumpsuit, her wrists shackled to her waist. Her previous arrogance, her designer clothes, and her defiance were finally replaced by a look of sheer, cold realization as the judge read the verdict aloud. Because of her prior, extensive history of elder fraud and fake divorce lawsuits in other states, evidence the prosecution introduced during sentencing to prove a pattern of predatory behavior, the judge showed absolutely zero leniency. She received a massive, consecutive sentence of 18 years in state prison for the combined charges of financial exploitation of an elder, felony forgery, and aggravated physical abuse. The judge made it clear she would be an old, broken woman before she ever saw the outside of a concrete cell again. Raymond, who had spent the entire trial staring blankly at the floor and desperately avoiding my gaze, received a harsh sentence of 8 years in a medium-security facility. The court held him equally accountable as an active accessory, citing his crucial role in the complex financial laundering and his sickening, cowardly failure to protect a vulnerable dependent living under his very roof. Furthermore, he was ordered to pay full and complete financial restitution for the $250,000 he had siphoned from my father's accounts. That massive civil judgment would permanently garnish any future wages he ever made and entirely shadow his financial future for the rest of his miserable life. He walked out of the courtroom in handcuffs, possessing absolutely nothing. But the heavy hammer of justice did not stop with my brother and his evil wife. The fallout extended well beyond the two primary perpetrators. Duty Officer Dennis Miller, whose initial arrogance and lazy negligence had nearly allowed the horrific abuse to continue, found himself at the very center of a massive administrative storm. The Internal Affairs Division of the police department opened a full, highly comprehensive investigation into his conduct that night. When they reviewed the precinct security tapes and saw him actively ignoring a federal agent's clear warning about elder abuse just to protect his own fragile ego, the department had no choice. He was formally stripped of his badge, placed on indefinite suspension, and ultimately terminated from the force with extreme prejudice. He lost his massive city pension, his stable salary, and his entire career because he was simply too lazy to do his job and investigate a crying woman's claims. With the criminal proceedings finally concluded, the massive mountain of administrative work began to repair the damage. Every single fraudulent property transfer document Raymond had filed with the county clerk was declared completely null and void by the Superior Court judge. The fake notary seal meant the documents were legally worthless pieces of paper. The bank, operating under a direct and immediate mandate from the federal judge, reversed all the illicit wire transactions. They utilized federal tracking to claw the money back from the offshore LLCs and the online casinos, and returned the stolen funds directly to my father's primary retirement account. The college fund Raymond had blown, the inheritance he tried to steal, all of it was ripped violently out of his hands and secured in an impenetrable trust that I personally managed. Justice was served, cold and absolute. But the emotional wreckage left behind in our family was something a courtroom could never fully fix. The beautiful house in Indianapolis, the one with the perfect lawn heavily mandated by the strict rules of those ridiculous neighborhood HOA meetings and the freshly painted shutters, was no longer a home. It was a dark, looming monument to the ultimate betrayal. Every time my father walked down the hallway, he stared at the damaged wooden doorframe where the heavy deadbolt used to be, the one that kept him locked inside like an animal. The large granite kitchen island where Vanessa had smashed the aluminum bat became a source of daily, crippling panic attacks. The house held entirely too many dark memories of the physical abuse, the isolation, and the sheer terror of wondering if he was going to survive the night. My father made the firm, unshakable decision within days of the final sentencing. He wanted to leave. He wanted to pack up his life, sell the property, and never look back at this city again. We officially listed the property for sale with a legitimate, highly reputable real estate broker. Because of the incredibly lucrative real estate market in that specific suburban neighborhood, it sold for well above the asking price within a week to a young family. He was deeply determined to wash his hands of the physical space where he had been held prisoner by his own flesh and blood. He wanted the equity in his bank account, not tied up in a house filled with ghosts. I handled all the complex legal work. I hired a specialized, highly aggressive estate lawyer to completely rewrite his will and establish an ironclad living trust. We ensured that Raymond was completely and permanently removed from any inheritance rights, medical directives, power of attorney privileges, or future claims to our father's estate. If my father passed away, Raymond would not receive a single dime, not even a photograph, not even enough to buy a cheap cup of coffee at a gas station. The trust was designed so that Raymond could not even contest it in civil court. The day we finally packed the moving truck was bitterly cold, but the sky was a clear, brilliant blue. We packed only the absolute essentials: clothes, framed photographs of my mother, his favorite recliner, and a few cherished pieces of small antique furniture. We left the rest to be sold or donated. I helped my father into the warm passenger seat of my SUV. His posture was visibly lighter than it had been in many long months. The heavy, suffocating burden of fear had finally been lifted entirely from his shoulders. He looked like a man who had been given a second chance at life. We left Indianapolis behind, merging onto the busy interstate and driving toward a brand new life on the East Coast, where I had officially requested a permanent transfer and secured a long-overdue promotion at a new federal field office. I bought a house with an in-law suite, ensuring my father would always have a safe place to live, surrounded by someone who actually loved him. As we crossed the state line, finally leaving the Midwest in our rearview mirror, my phone began to buzz incessantly in the center cup holder. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was Aunt Beatrice calling, followed immediately by a long, rambling text message from Uncle Richard. The trial had been front-page news across the state. The family enablers, the ones who had heavily sided with my brother, the ones who had called me dramatic, the ones who had demanded I drop the frivolous lawsuit to protect the family name, were suddenly desperate to apologize now that the horrific truth was entirely public. They realized they had backed a monster. They wanted to make amends. They wanted to pretend we were still a big, happy family and invite us to the upcoming Thanksgiving dinner as if nothing had happened. I did not answer the phone. I did not read the rest of the text message. Instead, I picked up the device, went directly into the settings, and systematically blocked Aunt Beatrice's phone number. Then I blocked Uncle Richard. I blocked every single aunt, uncle, and distant cousin who had ever doubted my word, who had ever accused me of overreacting, or who had enabled Raymond's toxic golden child syndrome while I was busy working night shifts at Walmart as a teenager. The bridge to my extended family was completely burnt to ashes, and I had absolutely no intention of ever rebuilding it. Blood does not make someone family. Loyalty, deep respect, and fierce protection do. I was not going to allow toxic, manipulative, two-faced people to have any access to my father's hard-earned peace of mind ever again. We were starting over, completely free from the emotional manipulation and the intense greed, leaving the wreckage of the past firmly where it belonged. Looking back on this entire nightmare, the greatest, most important lesson I learned is that evil does not always break into your house through a broken window wearing a dark ski mask. Sometimes evil has a key to your front door. Sometimes evil sits right next to you at your Thanksgiving dinner table, asks you to pass the gravy, and smiles warmly at you while actively planning your total financial and physical destruction. We are taught from a very young age by society that family is everything, that you must always forgive and forget because they are your blood. That is a highly dangerous, incredibly toxic lie designed to keep victims trapped. You do not owe your abusers any form of forgiveness just because you happen to share the exact same last name. You do not owe your sanity or your peace of mind to people who are entirely willing to destroy your life just to secure a paycheck, win a fake custody battle, or steal an early inheritance. Setting strict boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of absolute survival. I had to become the ultimate villain in my extended family's eyes to become the protector my father desperately needed. And I would gladly do it again, 1,000 times over, without a single second of hesitation or regret. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand to protect yourself or someone you love deeply from the people who were supposed to care for you? Share your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your incredible courage helps others realize they are not alone in this difficult fight against toxic family members. And please, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next journey. Until next time, stay strong, always trust your instincts, and never apologize for fiercely protecting your peace.